I'm Meg Pollock. I am 37 and I want to raise awareness of the illness ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. Your project is 1,000 faces, and of those 1,000 people, 4 of them have ME, and 1 of them has it so badly that they are housebound. I developed ME 5.5 years ago. I caught a virus that seemed to be like a normal head cold. I kept going to work and I didn't get better from the virus. And after a month, I developed catastrophic fatigue. So I was struggling to move around my house. Before that, I'd been very fit and healthy. So it was incredible to struggle like that. And while the physical side of it was a disaster, the thing that was most difficult to cope with was that my cognitive powers were completely squashed. So I could only have a conversation on the telephone for 10 minutes and then my mind would just stop working and I would need to go and lie down. My good friend, my kayaking buddy, Hilda, she caught the same virus and she also developed this catastrophic fatigue. And over the first 6 months, we were both able to eventually go for a cup of tea together. One of us would be able to drive to the other's house and we'd be able to have a cup of tea and support each other. Sometimes I could drive, sometimes she could drive. And then after 6 months, Hilda caught swine flu and she suddenly became even more severely affected. So she struggled to speak for a minute or 2 at a time. For the first few days, her partner had to spoon feed her to keep her alive. That was 5 years ago, and she is still housebound. My health, I didn't catch swine flu, and my health has continued to slowly improve. So I'm now working about 8 hours a week. My employer's great, and I can drive myself to Fort William and go swimming and do a bit. But if I walk too far, if I walk more than 500 metres in one go, then a day or 2 later, I will feel like I've got flu. So I have to be very careful about what I do and breaking activity up into little chunks. But the reason that I wanted to speak to you today, to the project, is that Hilda isn't getting any support. There isn't any treatment. There's no test that says categorically this illness is present in a person. It's just based on the symptoms that they describe. And there is no treatment apart from pacing oneself. And for an illness that affects so many people in Scotland, 4 in 1,000, that just seems terrible. My own GP is great, and she accepts that if I say I feel knackered, I am knackered. So there hasn't been a problem for me personally. But I run a group in Lochaber for people who have ME. There wasn't a group until I set it up. And I hear the other people talking about how they've been dismissed and disbelieved by their GP and by other healthcare professionals. And it is incredibly annoying and frustrating. I have some hope that most of the problems are from older GPs who are going to retire in the next 5 or 10 years, and that the younger ones coming through have a more balanced, informed attitude and are more likely to have read the Scottish Good Practice Statement, which says at the top, this illness is real. It tends to be called chronic fatigue syndrome or post-viral fatigue syndrome in literature rather than ME, because there is evidence of inflammation of the parts of the central, not the central nervous system, but the nervous system. But it's only been seen in autopsy, not in live patients. And so doctors are unwilling to use the term ME when it doesn't refer to something that they can observe. Facebook is great and has allowed me to meet people who are in similar situations, and some of the best advice on pacing is information that I've found from blogs. I can remember reading about one where a lady was saying if you've got 3-4 jobs to do. You need to wash the dishes, pay some bills, check your emails, and load the washing machine. Then you need to do those jobs so that you're alternating between a physical job and a mental job, rather than trying to do all the physical jobs and then all the mental jobs. You're much more likely to be able to achieve them if you switch between one and the other and put rests in between if you need to. I think that as a scientist, I have become more excited about the scientific process and the importance of doing science in a rigorous way. There has been some science done, some research studies done on therapies for CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, and I think that the data has been presented in a way that is biased, and I see the effects of that. So I'm talking about a therapy called CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. The general principle is that if you see someone walking down the street that you know and they ignore you, then your natural reaction is to think, oh, they don't love me anymore. And actually, there's probably lots of reasons, like they're having a bad day, or they've left their oven on or something. There's some other reason why things happen, and it's not necessarily to do with oneself. But in ME, CFS, it's sometimes used to try and persuade sufferers that their symptoms are not as important as they think they are, that people are not as ill as they think they are. So because one concentrates on one's symptoms and gets kind of immersed in them and can't think about anything else, that makes you feel iller. So they did the study, and it's been published, and they sort of appeared to have massaged the data to make it look like the effect was greater than it actually was. So for instance, recovery rates, they had one definition of recovery, and it was on a percentage scale of 100. So if you had to be less than 60, I think, to enter the study. Maybe less than 65. And they changed the definition of recovery at the end so that you could actually have entered the trial at 65 out of 100, got 5 points worse and gone down to 60, but now be classed as being within the normal range. And they did that by using a different population to base the normal range on. They used adults under 65 for the first definition, and they used the whole population for the second definition. Because old people have less energy than under 65s, it affected it. One of the healthcare workers who visited Hilda said, I'm not going to give you the therapy that I'm trying to provide unless you also go and have a course of CBT. And the only CBT that was available is in Fort William, and Hilda's not well enough to travel, even if she and her doctor thought the CBT would be helpful. And it's just breathtaking that people can, healthcare professional can talk to a patient like that. For healthcare professionals and for the public, in accepting ME patients, part of the problem is that we look well. You wouldn't think there was anything wrong with me to look at me. And you wouldn't believe that I could only walk 500 metres in one go. And that is part of the problem and something that needs to be overcome. The way that you look doesn't necessarily say anything about how you actually are.